Have you ever met someone who felt eerily familiar, like a déjà vu wrapped in human form? Maybe you weren't looking, maybe you weren't ready, and yet, the moment you locked eyes, the world seemed to pause. Not with fireworks, but with a quiet certainty, a knowing, a stillness, something deeper than attraction, beyond explanation. If you've ever felt that, this video is for you. Because you're not crazy, you're not alone. And no, it wasn't just in your head. We're about to take a journey through one of the most mysterious and transformative ideas in modern psychology. Carl Jung called it synchronicity, a beautiful word for moments that feel impossibly timed, heartbreakingly precise, like the universe whispered your name and someone else heard it too. We'll explore why some people feel meant for us, and why that feeling doesn't always mean they're meant to stay. But first, let me tell you about Emily. She didn't believe in fate, not really. But one rainy afternoon in Brooklyn, she met someone who would change everything, not because he stayed, but because he mirrored something in her she'd forgotten. If you've ever felt seen by someone who didn't even know your story, if your soul ever whispered yes before your mind could explain why, then stay with me. And if even a small part of this feels like your truth, drop a 1 in the comments and let's begin this journey together. Have you ever met someone and couldn't stop thinking about them even though you barely knew their name? It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't lust. It was something else, something softer, quieter, but impossible to ignore. Emily wasn't the type to believe in signs. She was logical, grounded, a graphic designer living in Brooklyn who took the same route home every evening, headphones in, lost in her playlists. But that day, something changed. It started in the most ordinary way. She ducked into a used bookstore to escape the drizzle. Rows of weathered spines, dust in the air, that faint scent of old paper and ink. As she browsed the psychology section, her fingers brushed against someone else, reaching for the same book, Jung Man and his symbols. She looked up. James. Tall, kind eyes, maybe a little older. Nothing dramatic. No slow-motion movie moment. Just stillness. Like her chest suddenly had more room to breathe, like time slowed down, just enough for her to feel it. Something is happening. They exchanged polite words, a short laugh about great minds thinking alike, and parted ways. No phone numbers, no lingering glances, nothing to write home about. And yet, that night, Emily couldn't sleep. She wasn't even sure why. He hadn't flirted. He hadn't tried anything, but there was something in the way he looked at her, like he wasn't seeing her face, but something beneath it. Something familiar. She replayed the moment over and over, the shared glance, the book, the timing. Was it just coincidence? Her rational mind said yes, but her body, her breath, the stillness she felt in that exact moment, it said no. And that's where this story begins, because sometimes someone walks into your life not with a bang, but with a quiet resonance. No chase, no drama, just presence. And somehow it leaves a mark deeper than most love stories ever do. Emily had no idea she'd meet him again, or that this fleeting moment would unravel everything she thought she knew about love, fate, and the way our souls recognize each other, even before our minds catch up. If you've ever felt that strange pull towards someone who feels like a memory you never made, then maybe, just maybe, you felt the beginning of a story like this. If that sounds like you, leave a comment below. Tell me, where were you when it happened? Who did you see? We're just getting started. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to show up in your life at the exact moment you needed them, even if you didn't know you needed anything? The next time Emily saw James, it wasn't planned. It wasn't even logical. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that slips by unnoticed. She was walking home from work, coffee in hand, earbuds in, scrolling through her emails. She glanced up, and there he was, crossing the street, same coat, same calm. This time, their eyes met for a few seconds longer. No smile, no conversation, just a silent acknowledgement that they both felt something. That night, Emily sat on her balcony, the noise of Brooklyn humming in the background, and started Googling things she didn't think she believed in. Meaningful coincidences, psychic connections, feeling like you know someone you've just met. That's when she stumbled upon Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity. Jung believed that some coincidences are too precise, too emotionally charged to be random. He called it meaning without causality, a connection that defies logic but resonates deeply. It's not just about running into someone twice. It's about timing that feels poetic, eerie, orchestrated. Like the universe isn't shouting but whispering, "Pay attention. This matters." Emily read story after story, people meeting lovers through missed trains, finding best friends in strange cities, dreaming about someone before meeting them. She felt a chill, not fear, recognition. Maybe it wasn't about James at all. Maybe it was about something inside her waking up. Because synchronicity doesn't just happen out there. It happens when your internal world, your longings, fears, hopes, collides with the external. When the world mirrors your inner state back to you. It's not magic, it's meaning. James didn't feel familiar because she knew him, but because she knew the part of herself he reflected. In the following days, Emily saw him again. At a subway stop, at a corner cafe she never went to, always alone, always just passing by. She never approached him, never interrupted. But with each meeting, the feeling grew. Not obsession, curiosity. Was this the universe playing with her? Or was she finally starting to hear her own soul speaking? Maybe the stranger wasn't James. Maybe it was her, emerging, reaching. And in those random crossings, she began to understand that meant to be doesn't always come with answers, but it always starts with awareness. What if the signs we ask for are already happening, but we're too distracted to see them? Have you ever experienced a moment that felt too precise to be random? Tell me in the comments. What was your synchronicity? We'll dive deeper next. Have you ever felt completely seen by someone without having to explain a single thing? Not in words, not in stories, just seen. Emily didn't expect it. She hadn't even spoken to James since their first encounter, but somehow, every time their paths crossed, there was a moment, silent, fleeting, electric, where she felt like he understood her. It wasn't romance, it wasn't tension, it was familiarity, and it shook her. Most people, when they look at you, they see the surface, your clothes, your job title, your practice smile. But James, he looked at her like she was already known, like she didn't have to perform, like she didn't have to be anything but herself. That feeling is rare. It bypasses logic, it bypasses ego. It whispers, "I recognize you, not from this life, but from somewhere much deeper." Emily found herself journaling more, trying to describe what she couldn't explain. Words failed her. She started sketching faces she'd never seen, places she'd never been, dreams that didn't feel like dreams, and always the eyes. His eyes, they didn't say, "I want you." They said, "I remember you." One evening, unable to shake the feeling, Emily dove deeper into Jung's writings. That's when she found it, the Anima and Animus. Jung believed that within every man lives a feminine image, his Anima, and within every woman a masculine presence, the Animus. These are not roles or stereotypes, they're archetypes, deep unconscious aspects of ourselves that we often project onto others. Emily paused. What if James wasn't just someone she was attracted to, but someone who reflected the animus within her, her logic, her strength, her stillness? What if the reason she couldn't stop thinking about him was because he represented a piece of herself she'd forgotten? That night, she dreamt of being underwater, not drowning, floating. James was there, silent, but she wasn't reaching for him. She was watching him hold something, a mirror, and in it, she saw herself. When she woke up, she felt a strange calm. A thought echoed in her chest. It's not about him. It's about what he awakens in me. From that day on, Emily stopped trying to figure it out. She just let it be, let the feelings move, let the moments unfold. And with each unexpected encounter, she asked not, who is he to me, but rather, who am I becoming because of him? Have you ever met someone who brought a part of you to life just by existing? Let's talk about it in the comments, because sometimes the people we can't stop thinking about are the ones who remind us of who we truly are. What if the person you're drawn to isn't the one you're meant to be with, but the one your soul is trying to understand? Emily had started to accept the pull she felt toward James, not as a crush, not as infatuation, but as something sacred, mysterious, unresolved. But one morning, as she sat across from her therapist, the question slipped out before she could stop it. Am I just imagining this? Her therapist smiled gently, like she'd heard that question 100 times before. And she had. We often assume deep emotional connections are fate, or worse, fantasy. But sometimes they're neither. Sometimes they're projections. Tell me about your father, the therapist said. Emily blinked. What does this have to do with James? Maybe nothing, her therapist replied, or maybe everything. Jung called it projection, when we unconsciously assign our own inner images onto someone else. We don't fall for them. We fall for what they represent. A quality we long for. A wound we haven't healed. A mirror we didn't know we needed. Emily sat with that. Was James really who she thought he was? Or was he a canvas for her unmet hopes? She began to notice the details she'd ignored, how James never lingered, how their conversations, if any, were shallow, how the rest of the story was built inside her mind, not in reality. It didn't make the connection less real, but it made it different, more honest, more about her. Because projection doesn't mean something is false, it means something within you is seeking expression. We often fall hardest for people we don't really know. Why? Because the less we know, the more room we have to imagine, to project, to create a story. James had become a symbol for something much older inside Emily, a need for calm, for clarity, for grounding. He wasn't just a man in a bookstore, he was the quiet her life was missing, and perhaps that was okay. Perhaps that was the point. She started asking better questions, not, does he feel it too? But, why do I need him to? Not, is this love? But words what does this longing reveal about me? That shift changed everything. She began to see James less as a destination and more as a reflection, a flicker of her own unclaimed self. And when she passed him again on the street, she smiled. Not out of desire, not out of desperation, but out of gratitude, because even if he never became part of her life, he already changed it. Have you ever realized that your feelings for someone said more about your story than theirs? Leave a comment if that hit home. Sometimes the people we think we want are just mirrors, showing us what we truly need. What if the reason someone enters your life is not to stay, but to echo the part of you that's been quietly asking to be heard? It had been weeks since Emily last saw James. The city kept moving, indifferent to her quiet inner shift. But just as she started to release the idea of him, there he was, seated alone at the back of a small jazz bar in the East Village. She almost didn't go in, but curiosity won. They ended up talking for hours. Not about dreams or fate or strange coincidences, but about books, family, childhood memories. Somewhere between laughter and stillness, James shared a story about someone he once loved. Her name was Clara. She was wild, he said, with a softness that only comes from missing someone. But she knew things about me I didn't even know about myself. Emily listened carefully, not to the words, but to the emotions behind them. Because James wasn't just telling her about Clara, he was telling her about a part of himself he hadn't fully made peace with. And that's when it clicked. Clara for James was what James had become for Emily. A mirror, a message. Not someone to possess, but someone to remember. They both sat there, quiet for a moment, as the music swelled around them. And Emily understood something she hadn't before. Synchronicity isn't about perfect outcomes. It's about perfect alignment. James wasn't in her life to fulfill a love story. He was there to help her complete an inner one. He echoed her silence. He reminded her of her depth. He stirred her need for connection, not with another person, but with herself. She thought back to her therapist's words. We are drawn to those who carry our unfinished stories. James wasn't her soulmate. He was her reflection, an emotional echo, and somehow that realization was more powerful than any fairy tale ending. Because it meant Emily didn't have to chase him. She only had to listen to what his presence awakened. After that night, they didn't make plans. They didn't trade numbers. There was no promise, but there was clarity. James had played his part. And Emily, she was finally ready to play hers, to stop waiting, to stop wondering, to start living, not in the longing, but in the lesson. Have you ever had someone reflect your truth so clearly it changed you? Let's talk about it in the comments, because sometimes we don't meet people for love. We meet them for awakening. Have you ever had a moment so quiet, so ordinary, yet it stayed with you longer than any grand memory? That's what happened with Emily. No dramatic goodbye, no final conversation, just one more sighting. A rainy evening, a bookstore window. James was inside, flipping through a magazine. She was across the street, umbrella in hand, watching him like a scene from a film she didn't know she was still in. He didn't see her, she didn't wave, but something in her shifted. That night she didn't cry, she didn't overthink. She just sat by her window, a cup of tea warming her hands, and listened to the rain, to her breath, to the kind of silence that feels like presence rather than absence. That's when she realized the moments that shape us most aren't always loud. They don't demand attention. They don't post themselves on social media. They are soft, private, gentle, like the way James once held the door for her without speaking, like the time their hands brushed at a crosswalk and neither pulled away, like the way he looked at her, not with desire, but with stillness. These weren't scenes from a romance novel. They were echoes of something deeper, recognition, remembrance, resonance. Emily began writing every night. Not about James exactly, but about how she felt around him, safe, whole, like she didn't need to be anyone else. She filled pages with things she'd never told anyone, not even herself. And as she wrote, she saw something clearly. James hadn't stirred desire. He'd stirred memory, not of him, of her, of the part of her that had been buried under expectations and deadlines and digital noise, the part that still believed in presence, in connection, in slow unfolding. So she leaned into the small things, the texture of her bedsheets in the morning, the way sunlight hit her apartment wall at 3:47 p.m., the smell of old books and fresh ink, the moments that ask for nothing but your attention, because love doesn't always arrive as fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as quiet, as space, as the feeling that you are, just for this moment, exactly where you need to be. James didn't need to be there for that. He'd already given her the gift, the reminder, the stillness. Have you ever been changed by a moment no one else noticed? Share it with me in the comments. Sometimes the smallest things leave the biggest marks. Have you ever had a connection that felt so right, only to watch it slip away without a reason? Weeks passed, then months. No more bookstore sightings, no jazz bars, no random sidewalk meetings. James was gone. Emily didn't know if he had moved, changed his routine, or simply disappeared from her life the way people sometimes do in big cities. But his absence felt louder than his presence ever did. There was no closure, no final goodbye, just silence. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. Grief. Not the kind that comes from breakups or endings, but the grief of almost, the ache of what could have been, the mourning of a connection that never had a name. At first, she tried to suppress it, told herself it wasn't real, that they'd barely spoken, that she shouldn't feel this deeply, but the truth was, she did, and pretending otherwise didn't help. So she let herself feel it, all of it. The longing, the confusion, the anger at herself for caring so much about someone she barely knew, the sadness that he might have felt nothing at all. There's a unique kind of pain in unfinished stories. No explanations, no answers. Just empty pages where you thought a chapter would begin. But as Emily sat with the pain, she began to notice something else. Growth. She was more aware of herself. More honest, more attuned to her needs and emotions. James had awakened something, but it was never his job to stay. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't a hero. He was a spark, a shift, an invitation. Sometimes the people who leave the deepest impact don't stay long. Sometimes they arrive only to shake us awake, and in doing so, they leave us better than they found us. Emily began to walk different routes. She stopped looking for him in crowds, stopped checking the cafe window. She made peace with the not knowing, because some stories don't need endings. They need meaning. Have you ever carried the weight of a story that never got to begin? Let it out in the comments. Sometimes the ones who leave still give us something that stays forever. Have you ever thought losing someone would break you, but instead it cracked something open inside you? After James disappeared from her orbit, Emily didn't try to fill the silence with noise. She didn't run into new arms or distract herself with work. Instead, she went inward. For the first time in years, she let herself slow down. She reread Jung, this time not as a search for answers about someone else, but as a guide to herself. She started meditating each morning, sitting cross-legged on her living room floor, eyes closed, breathing deep into the parts of her that still felt tight, confused, or left behind. What surfaced surprised her. Memories of being 10 years old, watching her father leave for work every morning, wishing he'd look back. The ache of being 16, rejected by her first love, wondering what was wrong with her. Moments of invisibility that had stacked up silently over the years, and in all those memories, a common thread, a hunger to be seen, not praised, not admired, just seen. She realized that James had simply mirrored that hunger back to her. He hadn't caused it, he'd revealed it, and in doing so, he gave her the opportunity to heal it. Healing didn't look like dramatic transformation. It looked like showing up to her journal, to her therapist, to her breath, to her own damn truth. It was messy, uncomfortable, quiet, but it was hers. And slowly, she stopped asking questions like, why did he leave, or what did it mean? She started asking, what in me needed to wake up? What am I ready to give myself without needing it from someone else? She stopped chasing the feeling James gave her and began cultivating it on her own. Safety, stillness, presence. He had been a mirror, yes, but now she was becoming her own. That was the gift of losing him, not heartbreak. Awareness, not longing. Clarity, not emptiness. Space to become. Have you ever thanked someone in silence, simply because they helped you see yourself? Drop a heart in the comments if you've been there. Sometimes losing someone is how you finally come home to you. Have you ever fallen for peace after years of chasing sparks? It had been almost a year since Emily last saw James. The seasons had shifted, her life too. She wasn't the same woman who stood frozen in that bookstore, heart racing from a single shared glance. She had grown softer in some places, firmer in others, more herself, less apologetic. And that's when it happened. She met someone new. His name was Daniel. There were no fireworks, no breathless silences, no cosmic pull, just warmth. They met through mutual friends at a dinner party. He offered her a glass of wine, asked about her favorite books. She laughed at his dry humor, noticed the way he listened, not to respond but to understand. It felt calm, uncomplicated, and at first that confused her. She was so used to equating intensity with meaning, chemistry with destiny, that this gentleness almost felt wrong. Where was the ache, the tension, the thrill? But over time, she realized, Daniel didn't awaken her nervous system. He calmed it. He didn't mirror a missing piece. He honored her wholeness. There were no games, no highs and lows, just presence. And that presence began to feel more intimate than any whirlwind she'd known. One rainy Sunday, as they walked hand in hand through Prospect Park, Emily caught a glimpse of their reflection in a puddle. It startled her, not because she saw James, but because she didn't. She saw herself, fully here, fully now, fully alive in this moment, and that's when she understood something. James had been the mirror, Daniel was the door. One showed her what she needed to heal, the other showed her what was possible after the healing. That realization didn't erase James, it honored him. Because without that first echo, she might never have heard her own voice. Without the ache, she might never have known peace. Without the longing, she might never have learned to receive love that didn't demand she earn it. Sometimes the universe doesn't bring you what you want. It brings you what you're finally ready for. And readiness rarely feels like fire. It feels like stillness, like yes, like peace. Have you ever realized that love didn't have to hurt to be real? Let's talk about it. Because the love that comes after awakening is the one that feels like home. Have you ever looked back on someone who never stayed and whispered thank you without bitterness? It was a quiet morning, the kind where sunlight stretches across hardwood floors and everything feels softer than usual. Emily sat at her kitchen table sipping black coffee, flipping through the last pages of an old journal. She found a passage she'd written almost a year ago. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know what he meant, but I can't shake it. She smiled, not because she had answers now, but because she didn't need them. James had been a moment, a flash of something ancient, a reflection, a whisper from the deep. He never promised forever. He never had to. He showed up, stirred something, and left. And in that wake, Emily had discovered pieces of herself she didn't know were missing. She closed the journal, ran her hand across the cover, and whispered, "Thank you." Not for staying, but for waking her up. She stood by the window watching the world begin again. Cars passing, a woman walking her dog, a child chasing leaves. Life moved. So did she. Later that day, she would meet Daniel for lunch. She'd smile when he reached for her hand, and she'd feel the difference. Not because he was better than James, but because she was different now. Awake, open, whole. We often chase clarity through closure, but sometimes clarity comes without it. Sometimes clarity is what remains after we stop needing a story to make sense. The people who shape us aren't always the ones who stay. Some pass through like a breeze, quick, quiet, unforgettable. They don't break us. They reveal us. They remind us that love isn't always about permanence. Sometimes it's about presence. Two souls briefly crossing paths and remembering for a moment who they truly are. James had been that kind of soul. And for that, she was endlessly grateful. Have you ever thanked someone who never knew what they gave you? If so, you're not alone. Leave a comment, because some stories aren't meant to be told out loud. They're meant to be felt, and when you feel them fully, they never really end. They just become part of you.